One of the most famous aspects of Greek mythology is its plethora of heroes and the spectacular adventures they undertake in pursuit of fame, love, and the favour of the gods. Some of their stories are adventurous and thrilling, while others are terrifying and sobering, and still others are comedic and hilarious. The most interesting heroic myths in the corpus of Greek folklore are coming-of-age stories, in which a hero assumes their rightful place in the adult world. The foremost Greek example of such a story is that of Perseus, the demigod hero who slew the Gorgon. This hero, unique in that he didn't really have a psychological flaw in his myth, is one of the most interesting protagonists in Greek mythology. And it is his tale that we will be discussing today. Welcome to our fourth video on Greek mythology, focusing on the tale of Perseus. Our story begins in the city of Argos in southern Greece, which, during the era of myth and legend, was ruled by a king named Christos. Christos wished to have a son, in order to have an heir to the throne. However, his efforts instead produced a daughter, whom he named Danae. Christos still wanted a son, and thus went to the Oracle of Delphi to seek her prophecy on whether he was destined to have one born to him. Upon receiving the important king, the oracle surprised him with a shocking prophecy. Not only would Christos never have a son, but his daughter would produce a grandson who was destined to kill him. Christos was startled by the news and immediately returned to Argos. He was determined not to let this prophecy come to pass. So, he very calmly took his daughter and locked her up inside an impenetrable tower with no doors. Confined to a life of solitude by her father, Danae spent her days all alone in a tower chamber that had only one unreachable window to communicate with the outside world. However, the three fates and the Olympian gods had other plans for the imprisoned princess. Zeus himself took a liking to Danae and transformed himself into Golden Rain, entering her cell through the tall window and impregnating her with his divine essence. A few months later, the guards informed Christos that his plan had not worked. Danae had given birth to a healthy baby boy, a demigod whose father was Zeus. Christos panicked and did something unthinkable by both ancient Greek and any other cultural standards. He had his carpenters produce a coffin, locked his daughter and grandson inside it, and threw it into the sea. Danae and baby Perseus would have drowned had Poseidon not calmed the seas at the behest of Zeus. Eventually, the mother and son drifted upon the shores of the island of Serifos, where they were discovered by a fisherman named Dictys, whose name literally meant fishnet. Dictys married Danae and raised Perseus as his own son. So it was that young Perseus grew up fishing among the impoverished of Serifos, and became a strong young man as he grew into manhood. It was a difficult but honest life, one that the powers that be would soon disrupt. Serifos was ruled by a king named Polydectes, who had taken a liking to Danae. Thus, in order to steal the woman from her husband, the tyrannical king devised a dastardly scheme. As Polydectes had recently married a woman called Hippodamia, he ordered each denizen of Serifos to give him a horse. Perseus was poor and had no horse to provide his monarch with, so Polydectes took Danae as a prisoner concubine as punishment, claiming that he would only release her if Perseus were to bring him the head of Medusa. Medusa was a Gorgon, a woman with hair made of snakes, who turned anyone who looked at her into stone. Legends say that she was either born that way from the monster Typhon and the snake woman Echidna, or that she was a priestess of Athena who was attacked by Poseidon in her temple. In the latter version of the tale, Athena blamed Medusa for being assaulted by the sea god and turned her into the monster she was now. Perseus accepted the task to save his mother, and set off from the island to accomplish it. Perseus knew he had a difficult task ahead of him, as he neither had weapons nor knew the location of the Gorgon. However, heroes in Greece often received divine assistance, and along the way, Perseus found this help in the form of the gods Athena and Hermes. The deities had arrived to help at the behest of Zeus, who had heard the prayers of his son. Hermes provided Perseus with his winged sandals to travel, while Athena gave him her shield to use against Medusa. They both told him to go to the land of the Hyperboreans, in the land of the far north of the world, where he would find more tools to aid him. Perseus set off via his winged sandals and soared into the skies to travel to the cold north. We can only imagine the thrill the young man must have felt, flying with the sandals at full speed alongside the chariots of Helios and Selene in the skies over Hellas. Eventually, he arrived at Hyperborea, having made a sacrifice and encountered some nymphs who gave him a large sack, a harp or sickle-shaped sword, and the helmet of Hades, which could turn its wearer invisible. Upon Athena's advice, Perseus then moved to find the only people who knew the whereabouts of the Gorgon, the Graiai, or old hags. These were 3 extremely old women who were the sisters of the Gorgons, and thus still kept in touch with them. Between them, they shared 1 eye and 1 tooth. Perseus found their location and bided his time, using the helm of Hades to remain invisible. When one of the Graiai tried to give the 1 eye to the other, Perseus jumped forth and grabbed it, rendering them blind. The old ladies screamed indignantly at Perseus to return their sight to them, but the young man would not do so until they told him where he could find their sisters. Eventually, the 3 hags relented and told him he had to cross the river Okeanos, which surrounded the world. Armed with magical gadgets, divine weapons, and precious information, Perseus launched forth into the air once more towards his goal, to defeat the monster Medusa. Perseus continued his flight far, far across the world until he finally reached the lair of the Gorgons. We do not know where this lair was. Some say it was near the Garden of the Hesperides, where the sun set, while others claim they lived far to the east. Armed with his weapons, he put on the helm of Hades and turned himself invisible. Perseus went inside the monster's den in complete silence, equipping his mirror shield to gaze upon its reflection and avoid the gaze of the Gorgon. Moving slowly and cautiously, he eventually came upon the Gorgons. Medusa was accompanied by her 2 immortal sisters, Euryale and Cethino, who were also Gorgons with the power of petrification. All 3 of them were asleep, and thus did not hear the hero come in. Perseus pulled out his weapon and turned around, slowly approaching the monsters by looking at their reflections. Every step was careful and deliberate, like a hunter approaching their prey. Finally, Perseus stood next to Medusa, his scythe-like blade in hand. He raised it, and, in one swift strike, cut off the monster's head. A shriek echoed throughout the lair, startling the 2 other Gorgons awake. Out of Medusa's decapitated throat burst forth 2 new beings into the ancient world. One was the giant Chrysaor, and the other the winged horse Pegasus. Perseus grabbed Medusa's head, put it in the sack, and dashed off. Raging and shouting, Cethino and Euryale chased after Perseus, but were unable to find him, hidden in the magic of Hades' helmet. Perseus ran out of the cave and launched into the air with his trophy. His next destination was Serifos, where his mother awaited him to save her. Perseus flew across the oceans and continents at top speed, ecstatic about his success and eager to return home. However, a new adventure awaited him on his homeward journey, this time in the sun-kissed African land of Ethiopia. There, the Greek hero came across a young woman chained to the stones facing the ocean. Perseus paused and descended, curious about this bizarre sight. The woman explained to him that her name was Andromeda, princess of Ethiopia and daughter of King Cepheus and Queen Cassiopeia. Her mother, in an act of hubris, had claimed that Andromeda was more beautiful than all the Nereids in the sea, a statement that had invoked the wrath of the sea god Poseidon. The earth-shaker god thus launched a giant sea monster called Christos, which terrorized the oceans of Ethiopia, ravaging human and animal alike. According to the Egyptian oracle of Amun, the only way to abate Poseidon's wrath was to offer Andromeda as a sacrifice to the beastly Christos in order to quench its hunger for destruction. Perseus heard her tale and promised to save her. After some time, Christos appeared, shaped like a massive sea dragon, growling in primal wrath. Perseus raised his scythe sword and, like the thunderbolt of Zeus, launched himself at the monster. The battle was epic, sword striking against scale, waves causing chaos as Perseus struck with the skills of a dancer at Christos. Eventually, he managed to strike one final blow and killed Christos, sending it bleeding its last blood into the ocean. The victorious hero broke the chains of the African princess, and together they went to Cepheus and Cassiopeia. Perseus explained his feat, and said he and Andromeda wished to be married. The king and queen were happy to agree to this wedding, but Andromeda was already betrothed to a certain Phineus, a local hero and notable. Phineus heard of this insult, and, alongside his friends, rushed to kill Perseus. Perseus merely scoffed at them, disgusted at how these so-called heroes had done nothing when Andromeda was being chained to be eaten, but only now sought to claim her as a prize. With a swift move, he pulled Medusa's head out of the sack it was in, which still had its horrifying powers of petrification. Upon seeing it, the suitors and Phineus turned to stone. With that, Perseus and Andromeda were finally free to return to Serifos. Before long, Perseus and Andromeda had returned to the poor Greek island. As soon as they landed, they heard some rather concerning news. Danae had refused to marry Polydectes, provoking the tyrannical king to take her to the temple of Athena to be sacrificed. Perseus and Andromeda rushed to the temple and confronted Polydectes, informing him that Medusa was dead. Polydectes laughed, declaring that such a feat was not possible, and taunting Perseus to show him the head if he had so succeeded. Perseus did as the king asked, and pulled the head out of the sack. Much like Phineus and his cronies, Polydectes instantly turned to stone, alongside his entourage of sycophants. Another heroic deed had been done, and the island of Serifos was free from the tyrannical rule of its oppressive king. Danae rushed to her son and embraced him. The worst had passed. Dictys, the fisherman, became king of Serifos following the downfall of Polydectes, with Danae ruling alongside him as his queen. In an act of humility and piety, Perseus returned all the divine tools he had received on his journey back to Hades, Hermes, and Athena. The goddess of wisdom also received an offering from the young hero, the head of Medusa herself. The grateful goddess put the trophy upon her shield, and has been using it to cause terror and petrification to her enemies ever since. As for Perseus and Andromeda, the couple settled into a happy family life. Perseus wished to reconcile with his grandfather Acrisios, and for that reason went to Argos to meet with him. But the scared king had heard of his grandson's exploits. Fearing the prophecy, which declared he would die at the hands of his grandson, Acrisios fled away to a region called Larissa in Thessaly. Perseus went to Larissa to participate in a pentathlon, a competition involving 5 track and field events. These sports were the javelin throw, the long jump, a foot race, wrestling, and discus throw. The last event would prove to be the one that made the prophecy at the start of our story come true. When it was time for Perseus to throw his discus, he did so with remarkable strength. During that fateful moment, a strong wind blew and changed the direction of the discus, hitting Acrisios in the head and killing. Thus, through this strange twist of fate, Perseus accidentally fulfilled the prophecy of the Oracle of Delphi. With his adoptive father Dictys now reigning, Perseus was next in line for the throne of Serifos, but he had no wish to claim his birthright due to the dishonor he felt from killing his grandfather. Alongside his wife, Perseus went to the southern Peloponnese, where he founded the famous city of Mycenae. There, he became king and, with Andromeda, had a long reign that marked the beginning of a successful, if tragic, dynasty. According to legend, it was Perseus who built the famous Cyclopean walls that surrounded the mighty city. Together, he and Andromeda had multiple royal children. The oldest was Perseus, who became the progenitor of the Persians, the mighty Iranian people whose civilization equaled that of the Hellenes. Another son was named Alcaios, whose own son, Amphitryon, became the stepfather to the most famous demigod of Greece, Heracles. The third son was Sthenelus, the father of Heracles' rival and labor-giver, Eurystheus. Another son was Helios, who founded a city in Laconia. The fifth child was Mestor, who lived as a prince in Mycenae. The sixth child, Electryon, ruled Mycenae briefly before Sthenelus drove him out, and the seventh son was Kainos, who colonized the eastern part of the Peloponnese. Perseus and Andromeda also had two daughters. The elder daughter was named Gorgophone, meaning Gorgon Slayer, in honor of her father. Gorgophone later married two Spartan kings, and many of her descendants are important heroes, such as Helen of Troy, who is credited with causing the Trojan War, or her twin siblings, the demigods Castor and Polydeuces. The youngest was Autochthe, who married the Athenian king Argios, father of the hero Theseus. After living long and prosperous lives, Perseus and Andromeda passed away in old age. To honor their heroism, the Olympian gods gave them a very rare honor. Perseus and Andromeda became constellations in the sky. By their side were Cepheus and Cassiopeia, the head of Medusa, the flying steed Pegasus, the sea monster Christos, and the constellation Pisces, which are said to be two fish caught by Perseus' stepfather, Dictys. Thus, they became immortal in ways even the gods of Olympus were not able to do. For every night in the northern skies, if one looks up where there is no light pollution, they may just see the royal couple and their heroic companions. The story of Perseus is a story about a young man coming of age in a challenging world and rising above adversity. Perseus is one of the earliest heroes in the chronology of Greek mythology, and he is certainly the most foundational. From his Persian descendants to the line of Heracles and Helen, Perseus defined Greek mythology like no other. As a baby, he seemed destined to perish in the ocean, but the Olympians were smiling upon him. With their help, and most importantly through his honor and bravery, he managed to save his mother and wife, defeat one of the fiercest monsters in Greek mythology, and become the founder of one of the most important cities in Greece. To consider that he did this as a young fisherman on an island ruled by a tyrannical king is to understand why he has a place amongst the stars. More videos on Greek mythology are on the way, so make sure you're subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see them. Please consider liking, commenting, and sharing. It helps immensely. Our videos would be impossible without our kind patrons and YouTube channel members, whose ranks you can join via the links in the description to know our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our Discord, and much more. This is the Wizards and Warriors channel, and we'll catch you on the next one.